you begin to see a new emerging way to use technology, emerging technology to scale up whatever sector you are. So I'm going to give the panelists one by one, if about a minute or two, to just talk about what they do actually, like in a bit more detail, so you understand the perspective when we're having this conversation. Alice?
Great. Thank you very much for the introduction. I think that mostly covered it. I guess World Remit, we're a competitor to Wave, who we just heard about earlier. We were founded in 2010 by Ismail Ahmed, who was himself a migrant from Somaliland and had been living in the UK for a long time, knew how difficult it was to send money home and just how expensive it was too. I think, we can't focus enough on how unjust it is that the most expensive place to send money to in the world is Africa, and even more expensive than that is sending money within Africa itself. That tops the world in terms of cost. So he started World Remit, and I think it's interesting in relation to what Linda said about trying to build global businesses. He started the company and it was called Africa Remit, and it was very much focused on just helping migrants send money back to Africa. And then he decided that was going to be limiting because this was a problem for migrants all around the world. So while the vast majority of our business is still money going to Africa, we do also support money to 150 countries around the world, including in Asia and Latin America. And so, what we're trying to do is use technology, and primarily, again, mobile money technology on the receive side, to enable more convenient and lower cost transfers. There are lots of other technologies that I think people are really interested about in the world of money transfer. Blockchain's the obvious one, but when we look at what you can do with AI and big data as well, one of the things that makes money transfer so expensive is the regulatory burden that we all work under, and the kind of compliance and legal requirements we're expected to fulfill. And there are some really interesting ways that you can apply machine learning techniques to try and drive down the cost of having to do that kind of thorough checking on all of your different customers. So yeah, looking forward to talking about that.
Awesome. Thank you, Alice. Michelle?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today. In terms of what I do, I'll probably be, like I said, a number of hats, really. I think in this context, I would talk more around the work I do under the British Blockchain Association. Under that, we are pretty much set up to really look at the opportunities that blockchain presents as a group, as a professional network. And then we're also looking into how we can explore, almost remove the hype, that is going on with blockchain, and how we can help with the education around blockchain and other technologies as well. So in terms of the work that I'm doing around that, is very much championing some of the really good use cases that are going on around blockchain, especially blockchain for what we're calling blockchain for good, or blockchain for social purpose, and for supporting humanitarian causes, for supporting healthcare is a big one as well. So very, very keen to try and, provide that basis to work on, on a technology that's slightly fairly new. People are still getting, to grasp what it is, how to use it. It is not applicable in every situation. And therefore very, very, very excited about working within that space, really, to explore blockchain and its potential. And then in terms of my other roles that I do cover, I'm also working at the University of Surrey, where we are looking at education programs and designing education programs around tech, around leadership, and around management, and supporting different groups in those areas as well. We also have what we call the Center for Digital Economy at Surrey, where our researchers are looking very, very deeply into AI, big data, IoT, and a whole range of other technologies, which do coincide with blockchain. And my other sort of very, very important hat as well, I do very much look at women and youth empowerment and supporting young people and women to access opportunities. Again, it goes back into the tech about how do we support more women and young people, for example, to access finance, to access information, education, and supporting those vulnerable groups, and really helping to champion that globally.
All right, thank you very much. Ibrahima?
Sure.
Oh, thank you, Chika. Hi, everyone. My name is Ibrahima Soumano, and I'm originally from Guinea, a small country in West Africa. I'm a diaspora myself. I used to live in Oxford, actually, so I'm back home. I'm back in my hometown. I'm a founder and CEO of a fintech startup based in London called Send2. And similar to what World Remit is doing, we are focusing on the diaspora, allowing them to send mobile phone credit to their families in their origin countries. We specifically focus on on airtime at the moment because we are looking at reinventing the way remittance is done in Africa. There's still a lot of pain points. I mean, cost is one thing, but also on the receiving end, how remittance is having an impact, or how can we create a new impact of remittance in the receiving countries is another problem. Because, I mean, if I give you figures for last year, official figures are saying 60 billion was poured into the continent. But what did that 60 billion really achieve in terms of having impact or economic transformation? So that's one area that we are kind of thinking and having a discussion on how we can improve that. So going back to Send It To, it was founded by myself and a friend of mine. And we cover 140 destinations globally, but our main focus really is on the African diaspora. So, Africa is our main destination, and there's a reason for it as well, is because there's no companies that really specifically focus on Africa. World Remit initially started as Africa Remit, and then they changed to World Remit. So we basically we picked up on that, and we want to be an African-focused company founded by African, responding to African needs.
Awesome.
So in a nutshell, that's what we're doing.
Thank you so much. So the idea is so you understand the caliber of people who is going to be having the discussion, but like without the publicity of emerging technologies like AI, big data, blockchain, so people are beginning to think, how do we actually use this stuff, like to transform, to tackle challenges in Africa? So our time today will be spent about having this discussion. So we're not going to be talking about what is big data or what is blockchain. We want to, it's the theme of the conference is enough rhetorics. We want to launch into action. So the topic says a disruptive digital revolution, utilizing emerging technology to tackle African challenges. So when I look at this topic, I see two totally different topics, because you can disrupt a business, a revolution, without using emerging technology. The fundamental core of mobile money is not using some actual emerging technology, but it's actually disrupting. So we're trying to marry two different topics together into one. But the idea is this. Let's start with this. Is Africa really ready for a digital revolution? Because if you listen to the keynote speaker this morning, we lack the infrastructures, we lack the skill set, we lack the people. So I'm kind of intrigued, like before we start talking about using this emerging technology, is Africa itself ready for this? Because we just started adopting the internet use globally in Africa within the last 3-5 years, when it's been in place since the 1990s in the other part of the world. So I'd like to hear your view about that, Alice.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talk about digital infrastructure, the main thing that Africa has on its side is the mobile infrastructure. And we've already seen so many jobs and innovations created from the kernel of particularly mobile money, and other things that are built on top of that mobile platform. I think that's the area to focus in on, and it means something for working in product. One of the things I have to think about is how we build apps and websites that will work for people wherever they are in the world. So you have to make sure that the technology is adapted to those circumstances. Considerations like something that would be fine if you were building an app in the UK around data consumption. Nobody would think twice about it, because most people are either on Wi-Fi all the time or have really flexible data plans. Just won't fly there. So I think there's technology in place. You just have to be aware to the nuances of how different technology is being used in Africa. Okay,
so Michelle, based on your role, wearing this several hats in education and all that, so I would like to see your opinion to this, because when you're talking about using emerging technologies in education sector or in health sector, in legal sector, there has to be some infrastructures in place. So how would you see it in terms of your expertise and experience if we are actually ready? Because I understand the mobile platform, but let's take it a bit further from mobile platform. There are a whole lot of challenges we have in Africa that we want this technology to solve, but we don't have the infrastructure. So how do you address that?
Sure. And before I sort of pick up on your question there, I think one thing I would I would say is that it's not necessarily just the lack of infrastructure. I think, like you were saying, it's the lack of skills and understanding to, to take on the challenges, but also to tap on the right type of technology. As you were saying, I mean, the environments that we are working on maybe are slightly underdeveloped in terms of the level of infrastructure. But I actually think that presents a significant opportunity to actually trial out things like blockchain, for example, in markets where, you don't have a very fully, established financial system. You can go in and disrupt to a certain degree using blockchain because it is slightly raw. So it presents a really interesting opportunity to test out what the potentials of technologies like blockchain, but equally so the challenges, like again around some of the barriers. For example, big data and data collection. For example, in Africa, yes, we don't necessarily have a hub of data sets that we can go into and look at. Which again is a disadvantage whether we're looking at things like agribusiness and tracking climate, changes for farmers who want to try and plant their goods. If we have that data and we can analyze that data through technologies like AI, then that would be really beneficial in terms of, planning for the farmers and for agribusiness and building agribusiness, which is so important and needed actually in Africa. I think agribusiness has the lowest levels of investment, actually, which we do need to kind of look at those barriers as well and look at how can we actually tap on the technology so that it's advantageous, not necessarily to just the farmers, but also to the global economy and the productivity of those economies. So in terms of how, the challenges around infrastructure, it's a combination of things, I think. One, yes, we don't have the infrastructure, but that should not stop us from being creative and innovative. Going back to the skills argument, I was saying, if we are able to build and develop and invest in, for example, our young people, who I think are there, we've got the right people, we've got the right momentum and hunger for drive to make changes. So if we invest in the young people, we give them the skills and the ability, for example, to go and code. And when I say code, I don't mean go and build platforms on things that are already existing.
So that's a very good point of view, which brings me to my next question. I would like to direct it to Ibrahima. So if we're talking about this skill set of people who are going to use this emerging technology, most of the things we've seen that came out of Africa is what we term to be copy and paste. They just look at a code set or look at something that is done and just copy it and paste it. So which brings the question: when you decide to go into Sendito, what was the drive and what was that technology or that need you need to solve? Because when I look at the mobile money space, it's been like in Kenya for like a very long time, fully established, and now we have Wave just presented, we have Flutter Wave, we have Paystack, we're talking about the emerging technology, we're talking about skill set. So is this a function, your company, is it a function of the available skill set in the space at the time, or how did you go about building the skill set? Because before you're talking about this emerging technology, like she said, you need the right skills. So how did you go about it?
Right, so I'm going to take you back when we started. Sendito was born out of, So Sendito was born out of solving a problem. So that's the first thing we had identified. I went back home in Guinea and I visited the village. I went to my village, and in Africa now, one thing that's really common and that's across every African continent is everybody's got 2 or 3 mobile phones, and it's pretty much it is the fastest adopted service, communication. I visiting my grandparents, offering them these airtime. I bought the scratch card and I offered to my parents in the village. It made a big difference. It had a good impact on them. So I thought, how can I do that from here, from the UK, being here? So that's how the whole thing started. And then when we started looking at the landscape and the ecosystem, what companies are doing that, there were quite a few players doing it. But again, going back to what I said earlier, there's no company focusing on Africa specifically. So we decided to take it on us to create something for the African diaspora, allow them to do it. In terms of skill sets, we did not reinvent the wheels. We did not, it's pretty much, yes, it was an existing technology, but that was not known to the African diaspora. In the majority of cases, same as mobile money. Mobile money is not widely used or known to some of the diasporas. People are still sending money via Western Union. They go into shops or they send it to a local agent that they've been using for 10 years. So it's, for us, it was not really creating a new set of skills, but it's mostly educating our users. I'm just going to quickly have a quick nudge on the technology. In most cases, when we talk about technology, people think digital, people think coding and stuff like that. But really, technology has a broader definition. It's a way of doing things, right?
Okay.
So when we talk about innovative, using innovative technology, which it is a brilliant subject, actually, topic today. When we talked about innovative technology, it can be applied to any sector, any activities, even in politics. So innovative technology for me is a new way. It's a smarter, clever, impact-driven ways of doing things.
That's quite interesting, though, because now I'm going to put you on the spot,
Right, okay.
And we need to dive in, like literally into the topic. So if you're talking about a new way of doing stuff, and we're talking about tackling African challenges, based on your expertise and your research, what are those kind of technology, and how can it be applied directly in some African problems? Because you are an entrepreneur, you build a business born out of the need, you've studied the landscape, so you understand the market, and you've seen some challenges that needs to be solved, and you are in tech. So do you have like specific examples of where we need to apply technology to solve stuff in Africa in whatever sector?
Yeah, there's numerous examples when it comes to Africa.
We'll take one.
I'll take one that was presented yesterday.
Okay.
Yesterday here, I don't know if some of you were here yesterday during the keynote. During the innovation fair, there was an example of an entrepreneur from Tanzania.
Okay.
They taking waste, and so plastic. Plastic is a non-biodegradable material, which is causing harm in the environment. So it's a global disaster. So these guys are basically recycling plastic, processing, transforming it to create a product. But for me, the cherry on top is their business model is also allowing the poor Tanzanian to have access to medical insurance coverage. So because obviously their finished product is being commercialized, so they're monetizing the finished product to pay for medical insurance for the poorer.
How do we solve that?
Well, no, it is solved. They're solving the problem because these guys don't have access to medical insurance. So what they're saying to them, collect plastic, give us plastic, and we'll pay for your medical insurance. So that's an innovative way of thinking.
Okay.
So it could be as basic as that.
Yeah, so that's why I said we are dealing with two different topics into one, because what you just described doesn't actually have a function of one of the latest emerging technologies, but it's actually disrupting the way things are done.
Exactly.
Which is why the topic is quite a bit complicated one. But I'd like to hear your view, Michelle, about this, because you seem to have an idea of how this stuff are going to be applied, the actual emerging technologies in terms of blockchain, in terms of AI and data.
Yeah, sure. No, sure. I do agree with you. I think, in terms of looking at the bigger picture, we're not necessarily just saying, we're using just the tech to go and address and solve all the problems. For example, there's been a lot of hype about, blockchain can address almost every single problem in the world. It's not a magic wand. It's not going to go and just, remove all the poverty in the world. It's not going to do that. It can help, with addressing certain aspects of it. For example, looking at trade, I'll use trade as a good example. If we are going to look at trade and the way we trade with other nations, how do we ensure that, for example, we are, negotiating, getting the right pricing for African countries? How are we negotiating and getting the right pricing, for example, for some of our farmers when we're exporting and, our produce? If blockchain can help with tracking, for example, in terms of tracking the produce, or what we call the provenance of food, where the food is actually coming from, the source of it, then consumers are going to be a little bit more confident, a bit more trusting trustworthy of the source, of where that coffee bean is coming from, that says fair trade? How do we know for sure that it is fair trade? If blockchain can help with almost tracking and ensuring that when those coffee beans are shifted from Ethiopia, to wherever, and you can track it by giving it that ID or identity, and it's tracked all the way across the supply chain without necessarily having middlemen doing that. One, it saves on costs. Two, it gives the farmers or the people producing those coffee beans a little bit more opportunity to negotiate the right pricing for themselves. Equally so, it helps with I suppose with transparency, and understanding actually, rather than me being told in a shop when I'm buying coffee that it is fair trade, how do I know it's fair trade? But if there is some way that you can prove that, that coffee bean has come from, sort of ethical farmers and all that, I think that is really, really important. So it has opportunities to help with transforming the way business is done, with transforming business models and giving that transparency and that trust, I think, which is important, for example, for consumer markets, especially as we move ahead with different requests now from consumers. So okay. Yes, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Before I open it up for the first round of questions, let me talk to you, Alice. So let's say we've seen examples of how we use blockchain, but you're establishing the mobile space. So how do you think companies are going to use technologies like AI, machine learning, and stuff like that? Well, like what's next for mobile money and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think that one of the great things about mobile money is it's helping to build bigger data sets that people can then use in the rest of their financial lives. And some of the most interesting example or applications that I've seen of AI and big data and things like credit scoring. So one big problem for lots of Africans is because of not having been part of the formal financial system, it's very hard to get access to credit because you just don't have that same track record that you can print out and show to a bank, for example. But companies like Tala, who operate starting in Kenya, I think, are using the data on someone's mobile phone to kind of triangulate thousands of data points and then, based on machine learning models from having done this at scale, give somebody a loan because you can see from the basis of their behavior, and it's all kinds of unexpected things like, the location data of the phone. If you're consistently each day doing what looks like a commute, moving from one place to the same place, and that's a really strong indicator that you have a job, even if they haven't asked you to like send in any papers from your work. Or having longer phone conversations apparently is a indicator of strong familial networks, which again, people who are better embedded in family networks are apparently more creditworthy. So all of these things that that some of them are maybe even counterintuitive, but by drawing on large data sets and being able to prove out the characteristics that make somebody ready for a loan, even if they don't have formal documentation, you can begin to give them a credit score. So I think it's that kind of thing. We're going to see lots of innovative ways of people identifying gaps, especially around, I think, like record keeping and some of that more like bureaucratic infrastructure that's been lacking in African countries, and finding ways to solve those problems.
Awesome. Thank you. So we've established the fact that even if we don't have the right skill set or infrastructures, there's still work to be done. We could use these technologies to disrupt or do like amazing stuff in the continent. So before we go down to how, because this conference is all about action, not speculations, like anybody can read up anything on the internet. We're going to go into actions. But before we go into that, I'd like to open up to a round of questions. If you have any questions, I'm going to take... Starting with, so we're going to do it I'll take 3 questions first, and based on time, we'll decide if we're taking the next set of questions before we move in. So I'm going to give you this. Yep.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you very much for insightful talk from the panel. My name is Abdurrahman. I'm studying MPP here, and I will go on a policy capacity in Sudan. So allow me to have more than one question from a government point of view. So, yeah, very quick. So you talked about how to, Ibrahim, the challenges for remittance to actually cause an impact, because what we see in Sudan is about 6 billion come to the country, and actually no investment, no money from that going for investment. So how that can be addressed? The other thing, you talked about the legal framework and how it's difficult. from someone who's working abroad, and we have a large diaspora abroad, how do you think African government respond, and where do you think they should change the practice to do it differently? And the last question, I promise, is that you talked about the skills. We have about 100,000 students graduate from IT and computers. Most of the entrepreneurs and accelerators actually see these people are unskilled for the workforce. So what do you think the government or the university should do for these kind of large volume graduates to actually give them an action, give them access to the market and connect them to the diaspora outside? Thank you.
He has the first mover advantage, which is why I asked 3 questions. Every other person gets just 1 question. Give it to the lady at the back and a pink jacket.
Well, thank you. I'm PhD student at Brahmanic School of Government. My question is, Africa is trying to realize industrialization, and the Asian experience is they realize the industrialization through the comparative advantage of cheaper labor. But with the AI and digitalization, it seems that this will undermine the prospect of African to rely on its cheaper labor costs in the future industrialization. So then what could be the comparative advantage of Africa in the future in this new context? If still labor will be an important component of comparative advantages, how could that be? Thank you.
I'll let the panels, I promised 3 earlier, but since we have an overload of questions, I'll let them answer that first, then we'll come back. I'm sorry. So, Alice?
Yeah, sure. So starting off with your question about the sort of legal frameworks, I think that international governments need to collaborate to make it cheaper to send remittances. I mean, one of the things that I consider really shocking, which is why a lot of remittances are so expensive, is the kinds of regulations that were put in place, particularly after 9/11, to try and reduce terrorism funding by constricting international flows of money, have ended up hitting the poorest people the hardest. And that one of the big issues we've seen in the UK is banks de-risking themselves. So because they face these vast fines if they're seen to be interacting with a financial institution like a money transfer company who aren't playing by all of the rules, they've just closed down the accounts of loads of the smaller players, leaving the big players in the market like the Western Unions, the MoneyGrams, free to set whatever ridiculous prices they want. So yeah, I think it's incumbent on the governments to make sure that they're regulating not just against, I mean, none of us want to support terrorism financing or money laundering or any of the other things that obviously crimes that can be committed with money transfer, but the government should also be making sure that banks and others take on the responsibility for enabling business in these areas as well.
So what's your name? It's a fabulous question. How, what kind of impact? There's various ways we can have impact. One big problem we have when it comes to African entrepreneurs is a lack of funding. It's the biggest. Look at, there's a lot of funds that have been, targeting. When they use Africa, but funds are going into primarily 2 countries, Nigeria, Kenya. And there's a reason for that, is because these are larger economies. So smaller countries don't have it, but they still have a diaspora that has a huge remittance power. So the way we are, obviously I'm not going to go into my big sister of a company here. But one way we are looking at it is how can that remittance, part of that remittance, start up in Africa? It has to be really the sender's. Well, it's not something that we. A lot of education that needs to go into it, so we need to educate our diaspora, let them know that $100, $200 that they send actually have a impact other than just paying school for Africans, investment means for the house. Whereas if you invest in a startup that has like real impact, then 20x your investment.
Quite interesting.
That's the way we are looking at it. So we can have a conversation later.
Sure. Sure. I'll start with the skills one, which you asked, and graduates. I think, to be honest with you, I think, again, going back to governments, you need to incentivize young people and provide the opportunities, the job opportunities. But equally so, I think we've also moved into an environment where young people are creating their own jobs now. They're no longer sitting and waiting for governments and other people to create the jobs for them. But what is critical, I think, is important that we provide the climate for them to be able to be successful, providing that access to finance you talked about. We're providing that access to information, that we talked about. We're going to digital again, because we are in a digital era. There's no reason as to why, for example, we cannot provide business support information to new entrepreneurs or startups. There's no reason why we cannot provide, even on the blockchain, information about access to different sources of finance, venture capital, whatever else is out there, that can be placed on the blockchain and should be communicated effectively to startups, to entrepreneurs. So for me, it's almost practical steps that you need to think about in order to create those opportunities for those graduates who do have the skill set in certain areas, and where they don't have the skill set in certain areas, then we must provide the opportunities for them to build those skill set. And I think that's the future, particularly in Africa, Yeah.
Very short. There's actually there's some actors on the continent that have already started to address this issue. A friend of mine is a founder of a company called Geber, and they're based in Ethiopia. Where anyone here knows Andela? Yeah. So it's a similar model to Andela, but they're based on the continent where they are. So graduates, come out of universities, how many years, dissertation, and you guys know. And they come out, they can find jobs. So what these guys are doing, they're training them practically for jobs, for the job market. And specifically what Geber is doing, which is really fantastic, is they not only are they training them, they getting them ready for the market, but they're also guaranteeing them jobs. So you become an African developer, you've got the skills in Africa, but you're actually being outsourced for a company based in the Silicon Valley, for instance, or in London. So a London company looking for, 5 developers. But they have a budget for it. They can recruit from Africa, and these developers are based in Africa. So it's that it could be another solution, and there's a few companies looking at it.
So, one more question.
Industrialization. Okay, sure. No, there are companies like you're right. Move Me Back Africa, the whole range of companies helping graduates get back into the market. But I just wanted to address your question around the competitive advantage that Africa has. One is the resources. Look, Africa is a young continent. There's a lot of young people. You can invest in those young people to take advantage of that, build that. The economy is also investing in the right sectors. I think is important. Going back to my point around agribusiness, manufacturing, and creating our own values. I think in Ghana, I have to state this because I was very impressed with this. I think in Ghana, they've just gone and signed a deal to go and produce their own refinery around cocoa. The impact of that for communities, not just for that organization, in terms of the long-term impact and strategic impact to support, those communities by having a refinery and reducing the costs by having to go out to go and refine somewhere else in South Africa or wherever else. The multiply effects of that, I think, is massive and will help build up the industry. So there's a range of advantages.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think the dirty secret of automation is that it still actually requires a lot of work, because at the moment the kinds of automation that we have are not 100% complete, but people are offering services that others expect to be instant. So if you look at like a couple of UK like reg tech businesses that do ID checking, and they spend a lot of time talking about their machine learning and AI, and in actual fact, when that fails, it has to fall back to a huge centre of people, I think in their case in India, to check it. So I think the comparative advantage of labour is going to be relevant for a lot longer than it currently looks. And by the time it's not relevant, then Africa's going to have the same problems as every single other company facing like a jobs crisis from automation. So I think there will be a persistent comparative advantage there for a while.
I'll take 2 more questions before we move to the next. And 2 questions, not question 1A, B, C, Just one question. And you want Kesha to take one in the front, yeah?
Question is for Alice. My name is Mark Lewis. I build content platforms purely for African telcos. Very quick question. With the UK GDP growth fluctuating between, say, minus 0.2% and, say, 1.5%, and certain African countries being between 2 and 7% over the last 3 to 5 years, and with very strict, sometimes banking regulations, Pan-African banking regulations, is it an opportunity for World Remit to review their model in terms of, and many cash-rich African businesses hugely growing, is it a chance to review World Remit's model in terms of the developed world remitting to Africa and vice versa? And I know this was really, really bad, but it's literally 10 seconds. It's 1 second. Changing the point of transaction for send it to for the mobile telcos from being a transaction point where they're delivering for the customers, for send it to delivering the actual transaction themselves. Are you disruptive or are you enabler for the telcos?
One more question at the back.
Hello, my name is Temitope. I'm a student here in Oxford in computer science. But my question is actually about the financing of your companies. So I think Ibrahim mentioned earlier that there's difficulty getting accessing funds to start businesses in Africa. So I would like to ask all of you, like, where did you find most of the bulk of your investment to start your companies, and what has this meant in terms of what you felt like you could do or you could not do?
Awesome. So I'll start with Alice and very short
Yeah.
answers.
Okay. Super short answers. Yes, we're looking at, we've always been doing, transfers from developed world into developing world. Now we're starting to open up African businesses themselves. So we've incorporated 6 companies in Africa this year, and we're getting money transfer licenses from them because we know that there's a huge intra-Africa remittance market, or indeed from Africa to parts of the rest of the world, often for supply chain. So we are doing that, and we're really excited to continue doing it because, as I mentioned, most expensive place in the world, like sending from Angola to Namibia, you'll pay 20% in fees on the total amount that you're sending. It's absolutely crazy. In terms of financing, so we were founded by Ishmael, who's from Somaliland, and Richard from Zimbabwe. They had both gone to business school together, so they started off raising money from business school alums, and they built out the business initially on the basis of the personal connections they had, which I think is what a lot of entrepreneurs do. So we started off as a business sending from the UK to Somaliland and Zimbabwe, and then because there's such a strong demand for these services and a more convenient and cheap way to do it, you begin to very quickly see good business fundamentals. And at that point, all of the international VCs get interested. So by today, we've raised $220 million from some of the biggest VCs in the world, but it all started from the kernel of those personal relationships and the contacts that they had from their own home countries.
So before I answer your question, can I follow on to how World did? So our business was, I started with my own funds. So I used my own savings to do the initial development to a point where I could not afford. So I got a co-founder to help me and carried on with our own effort to the point where we had a working product, built the VC business angels. And I've been lucky to raise the same amount of money with one less zero. One less zero.
For now. Yeah.
So, no, actually 2 zeros.
There you go.
For now, yeah. So, but most of our funding are from business angels, individuals. The second question about send it to be or I think depends on how you look at it, but I'll say with both. Disruptive in the way doing our marketing, and nobody was really for us. In that sense, the way we do our marketing, the technology side, we did not reinvent it. It was a technology market. The way we took it to market. We will be more disruptive when blockchain. Some of these technologies, most of these technologies.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to take any question now. We just need to round up this session, and if there's time for question, we'll take one more question. So, like I said, this is all about actions, right? So it's not all about rhetorics. So according to what's his name again? A senior partner in marketing at Microsoft. They identified 4 particular tenets of disruptive revolution. And the first is, how do we engage customers? Second is how we transform products. Third is how we optimize business operations. And then finally is how do we empower employees? Because the idea is you have this dashing technology called blockchain, data, yeah, what the hell you call it, is just a tech. But then you need to find a way to make it work. So which brings me to my first question, Ibrahim, just very briefly. So how do you actually engage your customers? Because you come in, you said you're looking at focusing on Africa. You come in with this disruptive new way of sending money. But people just, humans are a creature of habits. They want to do what they always do, go to the bank and send money. They don't want to adapt. So how do you engage your customers?
Well, our customers, again, are very specific. It's the African diaspora, and probably one of the most difficult segments in trying to sell a product to. So we use the African. Being an African, being an African, I've got an advantage of knowing what works for Africans. So we really, we go into the communities. We don't use the traditional ways of marketing, like digital marketing, and we do some of that, but mostly we really use African strategies to get to the communities, educate them, demonstrate our product, prove to them that it works, and then basically leave it to them to make a decision. But essentially it's education. Education is the main key. You still have to educate your customers. We do it very well.
I can see that. Michelle, how about optimizing business operation? Because you've done a lot of work in different segments. So, so technologies is at the center of driving efficiency and optimizing operations to accelerate responsiveness. So how do you actually optimize business operations using these emerging technologies?
Sure. I think, how you optimize, obviously we have different businesses have different business models, and I think you have to tailor the technologies. For example, blockchain, if you want to improve efficiency, and cost saving by eliminating some of the costs that are associated with, heavy legacy system in the legal industry, for example, where you're dealing with a lot of paperwork, you're dealing with a lot of insurance, again, you're dealing with so much paperwork. You can eliminate all that by using the blockchain, for example, to automate some of the processes that are required. So improving efficiency, but also improving understanding of your customers, as you were saying, can help with optimizing business activities as well. So it's very much about understanding your business, understanding your customers, and understanding where the opportunities are to improve the processes that are required to deliver on your business. I think it's very important.
Awesome. So, and finally, the last question goes to you, Alice. Having done fantastically well in developing the product team at World Remit. So one of the tenants is, how do we transform products? What's the drive? How do you actually move this new innovation to create new revenue opportunities using products, processes, tech, and so how do you do that?
Yeah, I think the most important thing you can do to build an amazing product is to listen to your customers, and there's no way to do that without actually going to meet them. So, every time we've launched in a new market, we've spent time going to those places, speaking to people who could be using the technology, and just talking to them about their lives. That's how you spot unmet needs. And then when you move into the stage of actually building something, take prototypes to people, see if they can use them, see what feels unfamiliar, what feels familiar, and just keep iterating like that. If you don't get that real customer insight into your product at the beginning, then you run the risk of building something that no one can use or no one even wanted in the first place.
Awesome. So the idea is this. One of the key takeaways is this. Though we don't have the infrastructures, though we don't have the full skill set, but things can be done. We just need the right mindset, the right people, and the right technology for a particular situation or the sectors. But let's go beyond rhetorics. Let's go beyond speculations. Oh, this can be done in healthcare. This can be done in law firm. Let's start doing stuff. Let's start taking action. Let's get out of our comfort zone and start doing things. And we begin to see that we're going to transform Africa as we know it. And I know a lot of people have a lot of questions. I'm sure the panelists are here for the rest of the day, so you could also engage with them outside and talk with them. And thank you so much for this. And I'm thank the panelists for sharing their insight, their professional and expertise. Really do appreciate you for taking out the time to do this. And for every other person here, thank you for being a part of this. And I hope that we get to talk some more outside about this. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Yeah, we must keep it blockchain.
Yeah. I hope you find it okay. Oh, this is good. Yeah. You sure?
You're going to raise all the money.
I'm coming to you guys.
Yeah.
What? Less than 2 zeros.
Actually, less than 3 dollars.
Oh my God! Just keeps increasing.
Keeps going down.
Hi.